Washington, D.C. is the psychopath capital of America. So a paper was published recently with a pretty interesting conclusion that may or may not surprise you. Politico reports. Ryan Murphy, an economist at Southern Methodist University, recently published a working paper in which he ranked each of the states by the predominance of, there's no nice way to put it, psychopaths. The winner? Washington in a walk. In fact, the capital scored higher on Murphy's scale than the next two runners-up combined. I had previously written on politicians and psychopathy, but I had no expectation D.C. would stand out as much as it does, Murphy wrote in an email. When Murphy matched up the constellation of disinhibition, boldness, and meanness that marks psychopathy with a previously existing map of the state's predominant personality traits, he found the dense coastal areas scored highest by far, with Washington dominant among them. The District of Columbia is measured to be far more psychopathic than any individual state in the country, Murphy writes in the paper. The runner-up, Connecticut, registered only 1.89 on Murphy's scale, compared with the overwhelming 3.48 clocked by the district. What's going on? There's one big structural reason. There tend to be more psychopathic personalities in denser areas, and the District of Columbia is denser than even the densest state. So it makes sense that it would top the list. But even when you correct the rankings for density, Murphy says, Washington still ranks first. This, Murphy hypothesizes, is because psychopaths are attracted to the kinds of jobs Washington offers. Jobs that reward raw ambition, a relentless single-mindedness, and, let's admit it, the willingness to step over a few bodies along the way. Psychopaths have an awfully grandiose way of thinking about themselves, and D.C. has numerous means of seeking and attaining power, he wrote in an email. The television critics who dismissed Netflix House of Cards as cartoonish and unrealistic, surely nobody could be that villainous, may have a few apologies to make. The presence of psychopaths in the District of Columbia is consistent with the conjecture that psychopaths are likely to be effective in the political sphere, Murphy writes in the paper. So what's going on here? Well, when talking about psychopaths, a lot of folks tend to think of serial killers, like someone like, say, Ted Bundy, or movie villains like Norman Bates or Hannibal Lecter. The truth is a lot less exciting. It's a lot more interesting if you consider the large-scale implications. Psychopaths are folks who simply do not feel emotions or prioritize the regular things the same way as regular people. They don't feel empathy or sympathy for other creatures. And because of that, they're very self-centered, ambitious, and greedy individuals. Most consider other people to simply be useful tools to manipulate to achieve or get what they want. You're just a pawn on a board. Infants exhibit many of these qualities as well, since they're basically helpless, and self-prioritization ensures their survival. It's as if with some people, when they grow up, that switch that activates a more complex part of your brain as your brain grows and develops, that switch just never gets flipped. They can be very charming on the surface, often fooling others into, thinking that they're great and trustworthy people. And I'm sure many of you can already guess how these traits would be incredibly useful in politics, especially while campaigning or fundraising. It's very possible that you've met and even known at least a few in your life. There are many researchers and studies out there that point to psychopathy being very common in power circles around the world. Places like elected office, the military, and business. They come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and genders. Some are incredibly smart, and some are really, really stupid. And everything in between. Psychopathy in and of itself doesn't make one successful, but the ability to fool and use people without guilt or remorse allows for these folks to climb the ladders within the government or within the business world quite efficiently, if they have the talent, motivation, and brains to do so, of course. After all, do you think just anyone could put a quarterly profit increase over the livelihoods of many employees in a, say, depressed town or state, knowing that layoffs, automation, and outsourcing will destroy these people's ability to survive or provide food for their families? Would you be willing to run a company, say like Bain Capital, that in a significant part subsists on the destruction of other companies? And by destruction, I of course mean that Bain would buy up smaller companies, ones often built through decades of hard work by people chasing the American dream. They'd load them up with debt, funnel the profits into the pockets of Bain's executives, and then shutter the company, or sell it off for a quick buck. This is just one of millions of possible examples of a situation in the political or business world that would give a truly moral human being pause. I know that I'd have a pretty hard time sleeping at night knowing that my success was built by stepping on the faces of so many others. Maybe that's why I'm not a successful businessman. So Washington, D.C. is full of these people. Is that really a surprise? It's a city built on the idea of profiting off of the rest of the country. It's the seat of the American empire. And the people who run the federal government have been responsible for the deaths of millions of people around the world in pursuit of what they call ideological purity, and what they won't admit is resource acquisition. They like to disguise this with the title national security. We have over 800 military bases around the world. They are responsible for that. We murder world leaders and destroy civilizations. They are responsible for that. They spend almost $800 billion per year on the defense budget, while claiming that it's simply impractical and too expensive to ensure that poor Americans be able to eat on a daily basis and see the doctor when they need to. That's just crazy. It's unreasonable. When George Bush and Dick Cheney destroyed a large part of Iraq, Cheney made sure that he would personally profit by giving reconstruction contracts to his own company, Halliburton. Barack Obama oversaw the assassination of most of Muammar Gaddafi's family, including Gaddafi himself, the destruction of Libya's infrastructure, the destruction of Libya's universal healthcare system, destruction of Libya's universal education system, and the enslavement of black Libyans by jihadist fighters that were armed and funded to help with the coup. Has Barack Obama once mentioned the open-air slave markets? Or expressed regret for the dead? Nah, he hasn't. I could go on and on regarding congressional representatives, senators, and unelected officials in important agencies like the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA. We could talk about General Petraeus' idea to arm and fund Al-Qaeda for short-term gain in Syria, despite knowing the atrocities they would inflict on so many innocents with the power that we gave them. We could talk about how both Republicans and Democrats vote for the direct robbery of the taxpayer by Wall Street banks, by health insurers, and by many, many other megacorporations. We could talk about the complicity of the media, cheering on Trump's bombing of Syria.
Go into greater detail. We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, "I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons." And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments making what is for them a brief flight over to this airfield. What did they hit? What are you convinced?
It's day 78 of the Trump presidency. What changed last night?
I think Donald Trump became president of the United States. I think this was actually a big moment because Candidate Trump had said that he would never get involved in the Syrian civil war. He told President Obama, you cannot do this without the authorization of Congress. He seemed unconcerned with global norms. President Trump recognized that the President of the United States does have to act to enforce international norms, does have to have this broader moral and political purpose. President Trump realized, as every president has for many decades now, that presidents always believe they have inherent legal authority as commander-in-chief, and they don't need to go to a pesky Congress every time they want military force. It's entirely true that candidate Trump felt differently. Candidate Obama felt differently than President Obama on these issues.
Refusing to cover truly serious issues and only covering hot-button topics when it's convenient for an upcoming election or to help their friends fundraise. There's just way too much of this stuff to cover in one video. Each of these issues is intricate, and each of these issues will probably get discussed in future videos if I get around to it. I suppose I'll leave you on this note. Is it all that surprising that a city in which peace in Vietnam was sabotaged in order to win an election? Is it really surprising that city is full of psychopaths? And yet, I bet you, most of you listening to this right now are going to go right ahead and vote for those same psychopaths when they put their charm mask on for the next November go-round. If you enjoyed this production by the State of Opportunity, please like and subscribe. Remember, you're the ones who make this all possible. You can also check out our Facebook page at Opportunity State and follow us on Twitter at @OfByOpportunity. If you feel like chipping in a couple bucks, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/stateofopportunity. Have a great day, and remember to always keep an open mind.